Greetings, and welcome to the Signal Watch Halloween. In this season of chills and thrills, we're watching Keystone Films from two studios who didn't just make their monsters part of cinema history, but released films that wove their characters into the nightmares and popular imagination of the last 90 years. Join us in a Halloween spooktacular as we talk the classic monster movies of Universal and Hammer Studios. Enter the crypt, and each week we'll uncover the most iconic characters of horror cinema. So let's talk about the monsters that make Halloween good, creepy fun. To a new world of gods and monsters. Hi everybody, happy Halloween and welcome back to the Signal Watch. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Steens. And with me today is...
Simon Day, hello again. And tonight, things are getting hairy. We're talking about the original and still considered the best werewolf movie, The Wolfman, from 1941 with Lon Chaney Jr. And then Hammer spin on it from 1961, Curse of the Werewolf, starring Oliver Reed.
So, going back to being a kid, you have the indelible image in your head of I did anyway, of Lon Chaney Jr. Before I'd ever seen this movie, I already knew this story of, his father had been this famous makeup artist who done Phantom of the Opera and these other things, and that he then died, and then, years later, his son followed in his footsteps in a way, even though he was never any good at makeup. And, went and did this movie. And both of these movies, when we were talking about Dracula, we kind of talked about how like Dracula is this like malevolent figure. And then we talked a bit how about Frankenstein is kind of like this character who is made kind of against his will and then kind of suffers for it. At least in the Universal one, and the Hammer one's very different. But both of these movies, and I think to put a very fine point on it in the Hammer version, are a really interesting look at almost like Greek tragedy. They're the characters who are cursed, as you get in the title of the second movie.
Oh yeah, no, totally, victims. And we see this all the way up to, it's like 40 years ago now, American Werewolf, where it's, the person is either unaware of what they're doing or they kind of can't stop themselves from doing stuff. And obviously as things get worse and worse, they quite often want to just kind of kill themselves or get killed, have somebody kill them.
Yeah, 1941, Lon Chaney Jr. plays Larry Talbot, who is the unlikely son of Claude Rains.
I wrote that down. There's no way these guys are related at all. Claude Rains only comes up to his belt buckle for a start. And also, he's about like 5 years older than him.
Right. We were watching it, and Jamie's like, that's his dad, right? I'm like, yeah. She's like, yeah, no.
Step aside Sean Connery and Harrison Ford. There's a more unlikely dad-son combo in town.
He's returning to the family manor. According to some sources, this movie takes place in Wales, although there's no Welsh ever spoken. Everyone's speaking with American accents, some British accents. and when you see signs written, they're all in English, they're not in Welsh. I've heard
That's
there's even
interesting.
confusion by the people who made the movie whether it took place in England or in Wales or in Germany.
Well,
So
it's interesting because a lot of werewolf myths do come from Wales. So it's interesting you say that. But yeah, it kind of tickled me watching this because actually a little bit like American Werewolf, although that did it a lot better. Um, this was very much like the American interpretation of England. Um, like, a little bit sinister, but like a little bit kind of kooky.
right. So his dad is like Lord of the Manor. His brother has died in a hunting accident, and Larry had 20 years prior disappeared to the States, where he was going to where he's apparently been some sort of mechanic or um, like high end handyman of some sort, because he's been installing telescopes and electrical systems. So he's been some sort of contractor.
Yeah.
But now he's back and he's going to take over for his father when his father passes. The legacy is being passed on.
So they had that conversation about he's the younger son, I guess, and he was kind of saying it's tough being the younger son when the older son, everybody expects the older son to take over. But it kind of looked like it was his twin, I guess, the picture, because it looked exactly like him. So I'm like, I'll say it was his twin brother, I think, who died.
I mean, I don't know. All I know is Larry was not the one who was getting the keys to the castle. So, um, and anyway, so he, being a total creeper, is looking through his dad's telescope and spies this attractive young woman who is working in a shop, and he goes down and he's a total creeper to her, and she loves it. And he takes her out to see the gypsies to get their palms read. And we need to talk about like gypsies in film. But
Bella
uh,
playing Bella, basically.
right, go please follow up on that.
Well, yeah, but Bella Lugosi pops up again. You can't keep him out of a Universal horror film in some role. He'll get in there somewhere, even if it's like as the catering chef or something. But yeah, he has kind of a nice little role. I kind of feel sorry for him though because this is obviously a massive step down after Dracula 10 years before. But he has a kind of cool little kind of like oh, I can't tell you what I've seen on your palm. It's too terrifying. Um, Although interestingly, he turns into a full wolf. We don't see it, but unlike Lon Chaney running about in his trousers, Bela Lugosi just turns into an actual wolf. Which I was like, does that mean he's more pure? He's a pure werewolf? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, the movie certainly doesn't get around to clarifying whatever that is. The movie is called The Wolf Man. It's not called The Werewolf.
Yeah,
So that's all you ever get out of Lon Chaney Jr. He's never on all fours. He does not have a bushy tail. He looks like a hirsute lumberjack in most of the scenes he's in. But yeah, this movie has a lot of really great things, and really is the foundation for how most of the United States, at any rate, thinks about werewolves.
yeah, totally. This
The,
this was the first one to bring in the full moon, wasn't it?
so they mentioned the full moon, but you never see it.
Mm.
Two, you see, all you ever see is it's in the poem,
Can I
which
say the poem? I've got the
oh
poem here.
please, yes.
Because boy, they say the poem a lot in the film. I think they say about 3 or 4 times. Even a man who's pure in heart and says his prayers at night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright. But for the sequels, they changed the last line to when the moon is full and bright. So actually, in this one, it's more the plants and the time of year seems to be triggering the metamorphosis. Whereas I think from the sequels onwards, they went, no, it's the moon mainly.
Yeah, and it's like if he gets like a little moonlight on him, that's when he transforms. Um, but yeah, so it has like this also the mythology of it, which has kind of disappeared in more modern, like I'd say the past 20 years in werewolf films. They don't do the thing where like if you look at the palm you can see like the next victim, or they see it in their own palm or whatever. I've seen it done a few different ways in movies over the years.
Pentagram tattoos on them as well, which seems very obvious to me. Like Bela Lugosi had one slap on his head that everybody could see. I'm like, are we supposed to all see that, or can he just see that? I'm not sure.
Oh, I never thought of that. I thought we could all see it, but that's a good question. They do. It also apparently. So I remember when we were doing one of the prior werewolf movies, I did a little bit of investigation. Silver had always kind of been out there as a thing that could kill werewolves from actual werewolf lore. But it wasn't something people really thought about much. You know, by the time you're in like 1940s United States, werewolves aren't really on people's mind. But that was what really brought in the idea of, they mentioned, well, what are the things that could kill them? I say, well, a silver bullet, and they kind of go down the list, and they look at the cane, and they go, or a club that's like silver tipped if you were to hit him hard enough with that. So,
Yeah.
if you show a cane in the first act, it has to go off by the third, I guess.
Well, that's a great thing about this. I found that actually quite moving. The fact that he uses it to kill Bela Lugosi, I guess, originally.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, he gives it to his father. Almost kind of like, you're going to kind of need this for me, without, maybe subconsciously thinking that, but without really kind of like knowing it. And just the fact that, and just how he gets in the first place, where he goes like, "Oh, is it a funny dog?" And she's like, "No, it's a wolf," and stuff. And I thought that was very nicely done, actually.
Yeah, and I can't remember if it's that movie or another movie where someone's like, "Is it a horse?" And they're like, even like later on in the film, and it's like, "No, it's a wolf."
Yeah,
But yeah, no, they do a lot of things that kind of neatly tie everything together. From him kind of casually picking up this cane because he's got to buy something because he's hitting on this girl.
gonna throw him out the shop if he doesn't buy something.
Yeah, he's aggressive. He is, and that's something that, like, the first couple of times I watched it, I didn't really pick up on. But at some point, maybe 15 years ago, I was watching this and I was like, man, dude, dial it back. Like, she's not saying no, but she's not throwing you any signals that she is interested. So quit following her around.
Well, yeah, he starts off like super stalker and won't leave her alone. And then I think when he realizes, or when he meets the boyfriend, he kind of backs off. And then at the end, he's kind of like, stay away from me. And she's chasing him around. So it's kind of like, it's a bit of a mess, really, as a relationship.
Yeah. But yeah, so he's bit by Bella while when they go out to the gypsy camp, it's to make sure everything's on the up and up, and because she is supposedly engaged to a total cipher of a character. She brings her friend who ends up getting killed by Bela Lugosi, but he then clubs, as we mentioned, and gets bit at that point.
Yeah. And that was well done. I like that. I liked
all that. Yeah. No, the forest in this movie is almost as iconic as the makeup. It's something I really love about it. On the extras to the Blu-ray, they were talking about how those trees were all painted black and then covered in glycerin.
Yeah.
And then they add all this fog on the ground, and it gives it like a really good, mysterious effect that people have been trying to like replicate forever. But apparently Universal also reused that forest for a whole bunch of other movies following. So.
I can believe that. So yeah, and then of course the next day his wound's gone. His wound's healed up. So everybody's a bit suspicious because they're like, "Well, you just killed Bela Lugosi." Although weirdly, at the end, I guess he tries. So I guess they all think he's killed Bela Lugosi by accident, but he keeps going on about this wolf. And when we get to the transformation, I liked how subtly the transformation was done, because we never see a full transformation We just actually see his feet, which is kind of enough, I think. You know?
So the transformation, well, the makeup itself was done by Jack Pierce, who is the same guy who did Frankenstein. This is several years later, and before reportedly he was fired from Universal eventually for just being too slow. I saw a
Yeah.
movie he did in about 1961 recently, and it is one of literally the worst movies I've ever seen. It was called Rise of the Humanoids, I want to say.
I also heard he was a bit of a nightmare to work with because he kind of wore a hospital smock and like basically thought he was like basically like amazing. So he was like, I'm the creator, and and everybody was like, we have to kind of put up with this. So
Yeah, he was apparently like, super abrasive with everybody. I don't know if he was, back in 31 when he was doing, Frankenstein, or if he was with Bride of Frankenstein. It may be partially why Elsa Lanchester's makeup was so much less, although they were trying to do a beauty makeup for that to some extent. But certainly she wasn't. She didn't have to put up with anything like having layers and layers of yak hair or whatever it is glued to her face, and the dog nose, and
10 hours apparently it took for him to kind of build that up. And we only really see it actually, I guess, taken off at the end when he's dying. But it still really works. It looks great, you know?
yeah. I it's one of those things of, does it look like a wolf?
No.
No.
Looks like his escape from the island of Dr. Moreau, actually. It's like,
I don't disagree. I mean, it's it's become this kind of iconic look, but it's also one that people haven't really tried to rip off. Partially because this is clearly the thing. It'd be like trying to do a robot in a movie and then going, well, it looks just like R2D2. Like, you just wouldn't do that.
yeah.
It's so of this movie and of the character, and because it did recur across, so many. I think Chaney played Lon Chaney Jr. played the role like 5 times, something like that.
Well, he's actually the only Universal monster played by the same actor in all its appearances. So they switched out the mummy. Obviously, they switched out Frankenstein's creature a lot. But yeah, he played the Wolfman every time. Yeah,
He played the son of Dracula in a movie that I cannot recommend.
huge moustache.
It's not great. I mean, it's worth watching at some point, but it's definitely a camp value sort of movie.
Well, wasn't he also the creature, Frankenstein's creature, in one of them? I think one of the sequels. I think he was.
Yeah, but I can't remember. Maybe it was Ghost of
Ghost of
Frankenstein. Yeah.
some right.
But yeah, it's he's okay in it. I don't think he's Karloff. I don't even think I don't think he's Bela Lugosi.
He's trying to be charming, and you kind of give him the benefit of the doubt. I love that scene in the car where they're driving along, and he's I guess the butler's taking him to the house. He's like, "Your father's going to be glad to see you, sir." He's like, "Oh, I'd be glad to see him too." And he's like smoking, and I'm like, in real life, that would be going in their faces, they'd be coughing and like crashing the car, basically.
You can tell
Yeah.
Universal put a ton of the house is what reminded me, because they can see the house from the road, and they cut to the big castle. The sets in this movie are pretty remarkable. We already talked about the forest set, which was, I don't know how big, but they were able to, of course, change it around by keeping these trees and just kind of moving them around from shot to shot. But the inside of the Talbot Manor is gorgeous, that set, and they show multiple rooms in it. And
the size of that telescope as well. Claude Rains has got the biggest telescope around.
Which can only point out like a window from where he's got it. It's very strange. It's like I can really see the village from here. I can't see the stars, but
I can't elevate it, but I can look at women undressing.
the Talbot men have their priorities. But yeah, it's a you can just tell. I mean, there's a huge cast between all the different main characters. Between Ralph Bellamy's playing a cop.
Cop from New York. It just happens to be in an English village for some reason. Yeah, he stood out like a sore thumb, but it was kind of nice to see him. Because even like we know him from 80s movies, but he kind of is he's aged very well, I think. So
Yeah, I mean, right around the same time was he kind of plays the God. How do you describe it? He's in His Girl Friday, and he is not the guy who gets the girl at the end. I'll just put it that way. He's just he plays a dork in His Girl Friday, but he's good enough in this, and the cast in general, between having the gypsies and then kind of the local townsfolk, and then they have to have the manor staff, and then they have all these people at a carnival they go to. And so you have sets that include like a gypsy carnival and all these other things. And then, of course, the whole village that they go into and the shops. And so this had to have been considered to be like, we're going to have another blockbuster monster movie. We're really going to throw money at it.
Oh, yeah. And I like, although, obviously now we're going to laugh at how cliched it is. I like the gypsy encampment. And the fact that they really keep pushing home the lore of the werewolf and the myths, pentagrams and, even explaining the Red Riding Hood is a werewolf myth. And I think the Gypsy Lady, so, Claude Rains and a few other people keep saying the werewolf charm. And then the Gypsy Lady keeps saying the way you walked was thorny through no fault of your own. But as the rain enters the soil, the river runs to the sea, so tears run to a predestined end, your suffering is over. She's constantly saying that to dead bodies. And I'm like, you could why don't you just sort out your camp and kind of run it a bit better rather than just pop up and say that over another mauled body, really. So
that's her job, though, and she's good at it.
She's good at it. She rides her wagon up last minute. Picks up the corpses. But it's like, it's also, I couldn't understand why the gypsies all pack up. And Lon Chaney Jr. is like, well, what's the matter? And it's like, there's a werewolf in the camp. And I'm like, there's always been a werewolf in the camp. What are they worried about?
I don't want to pick too much on plot holes, but yes, like they don't ever say, oh, well, we would chain him up or contain him somehow.
Yeah, but
on the nights he was going to turn. Yeah.
She even lets him go, doesn't she? She gets him out of the trap. Which I'm like, well, I didn't really understand why, except she feels sorry for him,
Yeah. I don't know what her relationship was supposed to have been with Bella in the movie. The actress's name is Maria Uspinskaya. She was a Russian actress who'd made her way over to the United States, and apparently did a lot of teaching of acting. Probably her accent and her rugged good looks, I guess is how I'll put it, kept her probably from being in front, except for playing character bits. But apparently she was a very popular acting coach.
Was she supposed to be a bit almost like a witch, because she kind of does that chant and he turns back human, doesn't he? When he's in the trap. So
yeah, I don't know if she's supposed to have been a witch. I think that's a totally legit reading of it, of at least she's using some sort of gypsy magic. And, it's one of those things of even using the term gypsy anymore is not supposed to be okay. I want to make really clear as we're talking about these characters. Now the term is supposed to be, I believe, Romany, and gypsy, of course, had got enough negative connotation over the years that it's a in the United States, of course, we have some folks from who are Romany, but it was such a big staple, from when you're reading Dracula, the novel, he's assisted by the gypsies. And they just kind of pop up in horror movies, here and there as, in different
shifted.
capacities. And here I think it actually it works pretty well. It's kind of like, here's some people who they're not like the happy and stupid villagers. They're kind of like living a little bit more on the edge of society and a little bit more aware of what the possibilities out there are.
Yeah. Well,
And
even as recently as American Werewolf, I know somebody asked John Landis about the backstory of the first werewolf that kind of attacks Jack and David, and he said, well, he kind of just had a backstory about basically these gypsies 100 years earlier settled in that area, and basically these travelers that kind of brought the curse with them, and this village had just kind of hidden it for as long as they could. So yeah, so even as recently as the 80s, people were still saying, we can use that as a good reason for werewolves, gypsies.
Yeah, I mean, and the term itself it's a fairly recent turn of events that term gypsy has even been considered to be derogatory. There's DC Comics has a character named Gypsy, and she's not a bad guy, right? I mean, she's
Yeah.
so it was just more kind of considered to be, oh yeah, it's kind of nomadic, and it's taken on kind of the idea of like, oh, you're leading a nomadic lifestyle sort of thing. And kind of living on
a traveler, really. Yeah.
But
what about the cowboy guy who was digging the grave and got attacked? He definitely wasn't from England. Where did he rode him from? Texas, I think.
Yeah, they had to get grave diggers from somewhere in Wales, I guess. Yeah, that was. He doesn't have many lines. He just is around long enough to hear a wolf howl and go, "What's that? Oh no!" But he is then the Wolfman's first kill.
Yeah.
So.
And I mean, also the hunting platform at the end. I'm like, was that already there, or did they build that? Because that's quite impressive. They got this big hide up in the kind of trees where it was almost like it's a bandstand. They created a bandstand, and they were like, "We're ready for this one wolf with about 20 guns and different levels."
But yeah, anyway,
it's Monty Python soaring noises in the woods. Look what we built.
I mean, but the movie's, if we're having kind of a hard time talking about it, the movie's really short and it's really tight. It pretty much has this notion out there of, poor guy comes home, he's about to live his best life, he's finally reconciled with his father, and he's just met a beautiful girl. She doesn't work out. The other girl he was going to go get the gypsy palm read with, there was nothing wrong with her. He could have moved on. And but he has this bad turn of events, and so that's kind of the weird curse thing. There's no like necessarily like moral to the werewolf story. It's more of like it comes at you fast, man. I don't really know what else you could really point to being the moral of the wolf man.
Well, it's interesting what you were saying at the start about the difference between this and Dracula and Frankenstein's creature. And I think with all of them, you can actually twist all of them, because we have seen, they tried to make Dracula into an anti-hero. I think a couple of years ago with that Dracula Unborn or whatever that came out and wasn't very successful. And Frankenstein's creature, you can obviously have him as, a nasty kind of like beast like Christopher Lee was. So you can kind of like twist these to however you want them. And we've seen, in films like The Howling, we've seen people who, revel in the fact that they're werewolves. Which actually reminds me, Belinda Belowski's character in The Howling is called Terry Fisher, after Terence Fisher. But then most of the time, like you say, it tends to be, a guy who's obviously, almost like he's drunk too much. He wakes up the next day with his clothes all torn. He's like, what the hell did I do?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I mean, even in The Howling, with the kind of turn of events is kind of like, here's something I didn't know existed in the world, and it's horrible, and now I'm part of it.
Yeah.
And absolutely, you can go back and listen to our episode from last Halloween of American Werewolf in London. But I mean, it's you know, David doesn't have a happy ending. Spoiler alert.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. No, I mean, Werewolf especially, I think it's always going to end one way. Because yeah, there's no cure. Basically, that's the point, you know.
mhm.
And
I'd
it's
have to
just going
go
to get
back.
worse and
I
worse.
don't remember the end of Ginger Snaps, and I know we covered that a couple of years ago.
Her sister, the one that was turning into a werewolf, she killed her. The younger sister killed her,
Right,
and then the younger sister had been bitten, so it was just going to carry on.
right,
Again, not cheerful.
right. But along the lines of The Curse, we also watched, which I've only ever seen once before rewatching it this weekend in order to get ready for the podcast. Curse of the Werewolf, which is from 1961, and stars. I say stars Oliver Reed, but man, he doesn't show up till halfway through.
I was thinking the same thing when I watched it the other night. It was like a good nearly an hour into the 90 minutes of it, and finally he popped up, and I went like, he doesn't have much time to do much, really, you know. It's
It is
kind of
a very weird movie. I want to start there. Like, if you've never seen it,
it's got prologue, almost like a Bond prologue about this filthy Marquis, that goes on for 20 minutes, like the backstory of how this werewolf came to be.
yeah, I would actually describe it kind of, if you think of like Superman the movie, it is not like Superman the movie, except that Superman the movie has kind of three distinct parts, right? They have kind of the
Yeah,
Krypton part, um, they have the Smallville part, and then they have the Metropolis part. And this one has kind of the early setup, and then it has kind of like, Oliver Reed as a child, and then it has, okay, now he's an adult and what's happening to him now.
yeah,
And the first third of it, all I can think is they had an hour of movie basically written, and I'm not exaggerating. And then they were like, well, we could tell what happened to get, so he's cursed in a couple of lines and,
yeah,
use narrative economy, or we could spend 30 minutes showing it.
yeah. And also, so this was originally, they built sets. This is great Hammer story. They built sets for a Spanish Inquisition film called the Rape of Sabrina, and the British censor went, "No, you're not making that."
We did
So
get
Hammer was
past the
like,
title, but you're not making that.
"You're making that." That sounds far too naughty. And of course, Hammer had these lovely Spanish sets they'd already built. So they took the story of like I don't want to say a werewolf in Paris, but I think it's called a French werewolf or something, and actually changed it to Spain. So they changed the background to Spain just so they could use these sets. So it was a little bit ad hoc, And I think you're right. I think they probably wrote extra stuff at the start of this film. Although weirdly, I found the first third probably the most entertaining. All the stuff up to pretty much him being born. I was like, this is great. This is so macabre and weird and grotesque.
It's, I think it's a your mileage may vary thing. I don't want to say Jamie's like the barometer for everything in the world, but I am more aware of things as I'm watching them with her, and she's running her commentary. And she's like, is there going to be like a werewolf for the werewolf movie? And
Wait for it.
And I was like, yeah, I don't really remember this movie super well. I don't remember when Oliver Reed shows up, because I was remembering there's a few beats here before we actually get to his story as an adult. And you kind of have to suffer through this like 5-minute sequence of like a beggar dancing, and you're like,
Yeah.
okay. And when I watched it the first time and I got tricked into believing it the second time, because I was like, I couldn't remember how the movie flowed. I was like, is this like Beauty and the Beast? Like the beggar like curses the Marquis, or like what is going to happen here? And it's like, oh no, this is way more grim than that.
Yeah.
This isn't a fairy tale. This is just going to be horrible.
It's almost like Deathline. It's like the Marquis is almost like out of a Vincent Price film, like Mask of the Red Death or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then, Richard Wandsworth turns up, who actually also played the doomed astronaut in Quatermass. So he's the beggar, and he's great in Quatermass, but he's pretty good in this as well. And of course, he's thrown in this jail, this cell, for so long that he kind of goes feral, and it kind of reminded me of Deathline, actually, a weird
Hmm.
bit where he's lost his humanity. And then, of course, this poor girl, because the Marcus is still going, this poor girl gets thrown in there as well for like a very small misdemeanor and for not talking to him when she's mute. And, and he rapes her. And it's like, you're like, I mean, even watching it now, I was like, this is quite depressing.
It's super depressing. Yeah, and it's one of those things that now they'd find either another way to do it or something like that. I think but I understand narratively, like it's supposed to be a child, born out of evil.
Yeah, like a cursed child.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, the actress who plays the servant girl was Yvonne Romaine. I'm not sure if she popped up in anything else.
She was in a couple of films with Sean Connery, but the fact that I didn't recognize the names of the films isn't a good sign.
Right.
Um, so I'm guessing this is way before Bond, even for Sean Connery.
Yeah, and poor girl, because she has to play through a lot, and she's not allowed to utter a sound through any of those sequences. And she
Well,
does.
cleavage shots in there. They managed to get in. I noticed.
Yeah, it is Hammer. But they're.
Talking
But
about
yeah,
Bond, did you see? Sorry, talking about Bond. Did you see very briefly Desmond Llewellyn?
I did. Yeah, that was super weird.
Yeah, he was the only nice doorman who worked at the castle. Who went, go away quickly before he sees you.
Yeah, I'm glad you confirmed that because I forgot to look it up. But yeah, I was like, I think that was, and then of course, then you get distracted with the rest of the action in that sequence.
Yeah, yeah, and of course Michael Ripper again, not playing the landlord. Amazingly, turns up as a drunk on the other side of the bar, and then I guess 10 years later, he's gone downhill even more because he's actually in the same. He's unfortunately for him, he's in the the same cell that Oliver Reed is put into.
Yeah. um, but yeah, so the child is born. The servant girl escapes and is saved by and I wasn't entirely certain what the guy's job was supposed to be. He's listed as Pepe Valiente in
Yeah, he's
the
like a nice Marquis, isn't he?
mm,
Kind of, but not maybe not as rich, you know.
right, yeah. He's no one's wearing a powdered wig at his house. But he saves the boy or the boy is born and he and his wife. I was
He's
never
his
clear on that either.
housemaid, isn't it? I think he's his housemaid. I don't think they're married.
The thing is
Like,
that looking at the credits, they have the same last name, but I thought he referred to her as his maid as well.
yeah, because she seems to be doing all the work, and he's not particularly nice to her. I mean, he's not nasty to her, but he's not like loving as in oh darling or anything.
Yeah, there's no hand holding going on. So
Mm.
maybe things just went sour years before and we just
Where's,
missed all that backstory.
where's my dinner?
But anyway, so they raise the child, and as they're doing so in the village, they find start finding dead goats and whatnot, and it's this goes on, and there's it's actually not bad. I'm sounding dismissive, but eventually, after they figure out, oh my gosh, the cute little boy is actually, sneaking out of his window at night and turning into a monster and killing animals is of course
Yeah,
the horror of the sequence.
yeah. And that's that child actor. I thought was quite good. I thought he actually was pretty good. Quite sympathetic actually.
Oh, I completely agree. He was really good. He's talking about like the nightmares he'd have and was kind of describing them, and it's a great sequence.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, Uncle puts bars on his windows, which seems to help for I don't know 10 years or something, until he turns into Oliver Reed in some very tight trousers.
Right. And I wasn't clear on this either because it seems like he goes off to go seek his fortune, but he only goes like 10 minutes
A mile
away.
down the road.
Yeah. And he takes like the worst possible job he could have found.
Yeah, Yeah, it was sticking labels on wine bottles.
Yeah.
Probably not very well paid.
Right. I was kind of like, doesn't your dad live in like a castle? Like what's going on here? But
Well, I guess he wants to make. He kind of does say he wants to make his own way in the world because I think the mother stroke maid says, "Well, you can stay here and we'll find you a job and stuff." And he's like, "No, but I want to kind of like see the world." I think.
I'm gonna, I can see my house from here, but I'm gonna see the world.
I want to see the next farm at least. Back in those days, that was a long journey. That was like Ulysses type journey.
That's a whole like 30-minute walk. Yeah.
You'd fall off the edge of the world if you went further.
There would be dragons. But yeah, he makes friends with a guy he's doing the labels with, but more importantly, the lovely Christina lives in the house. And I thought this girl was perfectly cast. If you're looking for someone who's going to look constantly surprised by everything that's going to happen, Catherine Feller had that down. And I don't mean that as a derogatory thing. Like, that was what the role called for, and she nailed it.
Can I just add? I'm just backtracking a little bit. I think his dad, Clifford Evans, Oliver Reed's dad, or uncle, has another pipe that you should own. Incredibly elaborate pipe. He looked like he could play it like a musical instrument, actually.
So, we were looking at that pipe when we were watching the movie, and I'd seen those in museums and things like that, but I had always assumed those were just decorative. And then to see someone actually puffing away on one, I was like, oh, well, what do you know? Yeah. I guess people really
it almost seemed like he was trying to smoke a seashell or something.
Yeah, if you don't know what we're talking about, basically, like, the at the bell of the pipe, between that and then the stem, there's this ornate sculpture like carved out of ivory.
Yeah.
And I've seen them, never for sale or anything that I can think of, but I've certainly seen them in museums and in collections. But I always assumed that was like a thing you gave somebody as like a gift, knowing like, well, they'll never use it, but it'll look good on their desk, sort of thing.
Mm. But and also, so the beggar as well, who I think they cut some stuff out of him drooling, just before he kind of like attacks the girl and rapes her. But it's like his arms suddenly got very hairy. His arms have got hairy, and I'm like, I call that out because I don't think he shaved his arms before he was in that cell.
No, so, I think what they were trying to. I think when you were talking about him going like feral, that was the suggestion that is he was kind of going mad over the years and like lost all his inhibitions.
Yeah.
That
so he's almost like just eating bones and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, they're definitely just throwing him like the scraps and treating him like a dog. And that
although she's kind of treating him nicely, so you would have thought that would be enough humanity but I guess that doesn't fit the script.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the weird things about the script is definitely like normally, and if it were more of a fairy tale, right, they would have been like, but her grace and charm was such that she tamed the beast, and
which kind of happens later with Oliver Reed. I mean, sorry, jumping ahead a little bit, but
no, it's fine.
She does stop him transforming, which is interesting because that's the first time I've seen that in a film, I think, a werewolf film.
Right. And so, that's the setup is as long as the priest explains, because the family goes to the priest and the priest goes, oh, you got a werewolf problem. I know about that. And so let me exposition this. So he does explain like, look, if as long as the person knows love and security, basically the werewolfism comes out as a demon manifestation that only occurs if they're feeling insecure or unloved or those sorts of things. And so he's doted upon his whole life, and so he's incredibly well adjusted. And he doesn't become a brat or anything. It's just that when he meets Christina and he's pining for her, that things start to go awry.
And the first time it gets dodgy is when Oliver Reed's in a bar, which I'm sure has happened in real life quite a few times. Also, the film ends with Oliver Reed throwing things while he's standing on the roof, which I'm sure has also happened. Um, but but yeah, no, I mean, like it's the setup with the kid is more like The Omen, really, because the holy water in the font bubbles, and it's like, yeah, he's kind of cursed, or he's got this evil spirit in him. Um, so yeah, and they actually there was another film that came out 1975, made by Tyburn called Legend of the Werewolf, which pretty much did this story again on a smaller budget. Um, so if you're interested in that, check that out. The Doctor in that's played by Peter Cushing, who kind of like works out what's going on. But it's pretty much the same story. Yeah, Legend of the Werewolf.
Yeah, I mean, and so that's part of the horror and the curse of this one is like everyone else has figured this out. Like his parents know, the priest knows, and they just haven't told him. But then they send him off into the world, which seems like an
They don't.
oversight. Uh,
What could possibly go wrong?
yeah, and part of you is kind of like, yeah, well, it's like if your kid was sick when they were a child, but now they're like 25 and they're we're going to take off and nothing's happened in 15 years, then you'd be like, yeah, okay, that's all seems well. I do get that, but from the what we have of like a whole 45 minutes of story or something, it does feel a little odd because the last thing you see is them going, oh my god, the kid grew fangs. And then it's like, all's well, go ahead and see the world.
Well, I'm also trying to work out, is he triggered because it's his first sexual experience with the kind of prostitute? Are we supposed to say that's it, maybe?
I don't disagree. I think I would put a little more nuance on it of he would like to be having an amorous encounter with Christina, and she's having to run around with the most hilarious pompous suitor like that I'd seen in a movie in quite some time. That guy plays it to the hilt.
He's got a great line towards the end where I think she's like, I love him and, give me your carriage. And he just goes, oh, I say.
He even has the exact arm gesture down correct to his carriage driver to like move along. Yeah, that guy's awesome. But yeah, I think he's going through the crisis of knowing he would rather be with his pure and wholesome Christina, and he's gone out to go blow off some steam. It's not the right thing to do, but he's also with a bunch of prostitutes and knows where the night could go. So
yeah,
I do think he's in crisis, if nothing else, at that moment, and sex is definitely a part of it.
Yeah, and maybe the alcohol as well. His defenses are down and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course, so we have the first night where he kind of like basically wakes up, doesn't know what he's done, and and then they start suspecting him. And then I guess the big one is the second night where he actually, and again, to, a lot of sympathy for him. He says, keep me locked up. I have to stay in this. Well, actually, no, he actually says, I have to go away with the priest. You've got to get me out of here. If you just lock me up, I will break out and hurt people. Kind of the same as, in American Werewolf, John Woodvine's like, stay at the hospital. And he's like, no, that's not going to be good enough, You're not going to be able to control me. So I mean, and I think Oliver Reed's a great actor. I don't think he necessarily needs to be a great actor in this, but he definitely, you can kind of see the charm that turned him into a star, I think. He definitely stands out, I think.
I don't disagree. You don't want to like dismiss what anybody else is doing. But everybody else is kind of coming off as kind of standard horror movie. This is kind of the level I'm going to put in, and Reed definitely is putting in comparing, contrasting he and Lon Chaney Jr. and kind of how they internalize and then kind of demonstrate what's going on, that there's an inner life with their character and that they are in anguish. Like Lon Chaney Jr. is like punching his fist and like gosh, this really stinks that I'm a werewolf. And like Oliver Reed looks like a dude who is realizing like I'm going really it looks like he thinks he's going to die and he's just been given a death
Yeah,
sentence.
yeah.
And you are there to see it. And he's really, really good in the sequences he's in.
And I think because of that, I actually found the ending a bit disappointing. You know, when he was finally transformed and just seemed to be climbing up and down walls endlessly for a while. Um, but I did like the end with the father. Again, you know, the father or the father figure kind of has to kill the son, and that's quite moving, I think.
Yeah, I do want to back up because I realized I screwed something up. I figured out why I thought those people were married because I had the wrong characters. Pepe Valiente is actually the huntsman, and Rosa Valiente is his wife, who's the innkeeper. So that's not his. I think his father
Yeah,
is. I can't
probably
figure out
widowed.
Don Enrique. Maybe I'm trying to
Yeah.
figure out who's who here because all the pictures of people on IMDb are of them when
Well,
they're much older and not wearing like
the, well, the
18th
huntsman
century
as
clothing.
well is played by Warren Mitchell, who
Hmm.
it's funny for me because him and the town kind of burgomaster, who's like, no, we're going to keep him locked up, are both guys who went on to be famous sitcom stars in England in the 70s and 80s. So it's funny seeing them kind of play relatively straight roles.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah. Because basically, the guy who plays the gamekeeper is pretty much like the English version of Archie Bunker. So seeing him, like, worry about what's going on with the goats in this is like quite funny.
Well, yeah, I mean, and to that point, like seeing Carol O'Connor in anything where he's not Archie Bunker, like, is just bizarre. And he certainly was in tons of other things. Um, but yeah, it's I think it's worth checking out at some point if you're not just if you're a completionist, but if you're kind of interested in where like werewolf mythos and all that comes from, because this is only 1961.
Yeah,
The movie looks a lot newer. You would think it's like 68, maybe 70.
yeah, it looks pretty
When,
good. Looks
yeah,
beautiful.
looks great. But you can tell they really spent some money on it, and
Well, this was one of the first Hammers that I think stumbled at the box office. So they'd done Dracula and Frankenstein and I think the Mummy by this point. And this one just wasn't a flop, but it just didn't do as well. And it's funny because I think that put Hammer off of Werewolves for life, because they never went back to Werewolves, compared to all the others that had hundreds of sequels. Um, and compared to like Universal that actually did keep bringing the Wolfman back, although he never kind of got a sequel to himself. He always had to share it with somebody else, I guess.
yeah, I mean, you can tell they're struggling a little bit with the concept. In general, they took the idea of like, okay, it's the story of a werewolf is the story of this tragedy, and then they like way over explain, what the what the tragedy is. And with just having like 45, 50 minutes of setup before you ever, as we mentioned, get to Oliver Reed. um and I think you even see how they're struggling with. They're like, well, once he's a werewolf, what does he actually do?
Yeah,
Like,
because he doesn't really do that much. I mean, he kills a couple of people, but basically, like I said, just climbs up on the roof and basically throws things.
right, it feels way more Frankenstein almost than anything else. It feels like Frankenstein, at the top of the windmill almost, by the end of the film. And I guess you can always have your characters cornered. American Werewolf in London, he's in the alleyway.
Yeah,
And so I guess getting them trapped is a legit thing, but him like running up and down the sides of buildings is also like, if you're trying to say he's like a werewolf, wolves don't really climb. I don't know if anyone
yeah.
needs that memo, but it
He
was
looks kind of like a pissed off wrestler, basically, at the end, I think. I think the color scheme helps either of the grey hair, which I'm sure they picked because it stood out more.
yeah.
But I don't know, he just looked a little bit silly to me, I think, at the end.
Yeah, I don't hate the makeup, but I mean, and I like the fact that you can tell it's still definitely like you can't tell Lon Chaney Jr. is Lon Chaney Jr. I mean, he is covered.
Yeah.
You can still make out Oliver Reed's features, which seem to be what they're trying to do. But then they're like, we still want to give him this wolf head. And so he almost looks like he's wearing like a furry Batman cowl or something. Which is, it's not horrible, but it's very ape-like between that and him like climbing the sides of buildings.
And it's interesting at the end how after he's shot with the silver bullet, this silver bullet that we've had quite a long story for that as well.
Right.
Going from, the gamekeeper's crucifix, to Clifford Evans going to get it. But yeah, he doesn't change back. He actually dies and stays a werewolf, I guess. Or at least we don't see him change back, which is a bit different.
Right, and I don't know if they were trying to set it up for a sequel, like, well, you may have shot him now, but, his body's going to spit this bullet out because you didn't also, hit him over the head.
Lon Chaney Jr. gets resurrected, doesn't he, in The Wolfman Meets Frankenstein? They open his coffin, and I think the full moon hits his corpse, and he gets up again.
Well, the moon hits your eye like a big pizza pie. That's a wolf man.
Yeah. Falls over another waterfall. He's in the fine. See you next time. I liked, I'm really enjoying doing this series with you because it's kind of making me stretch a little bit out of my comfort zone. I haven't seen a lot of these for 10 years or more. And I enjoyed both of these. And I think The Wolfman definitely sets up a lot of mythology that we're still using today. Very well, it kind of like, pretty much that's ground zero for, the werewolf films we're getting still now. And then, the Hammer one, I think, was an interesting experiment that didn't quite work. But yeah, it was different enough to, stand out, definitely. And Oliver Reed was really good.
Yeah, I like some of the things they tried in it, with the trying to give it kind of a psychological bent. And I also wonder if it's not the thing, because, it's not like people think Werewolf Silver Cane, people think Silver Bullet, and this movie focuses so much on the Silver Bullet. And 61 would have been like, okay, this is going to then be on TV within a few years. So I do wonder if that's really where the idea of the Silver Bullet really took off as part of the werewolf mythology.
But also, interestingly, in American Werewolf, Jack, David says to Jack, don't I need the silver bullet? And he goes, can I give me a break? Be serious. Then also, when he's in bed with Jenny Agutter, David, he says, have you seen The Wolfman? And she goes, oh, do you mean the old one with Oliver Reed? And he goes, no, Lon Chaney Jr. So that's a nice link, actually.
Well, I also thought that was always a really nice, like, what does a Brit think of and what does an American think of?
Yeah. That's very true, yeah. No, yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
Because this one is one that, like, maybe on TCM, they might play it a little bit during, like, the Halloween season, but they kind of play the Hammer Draculas kind of, especially during October on Turner Classic. But they really kind of play them all year long. But this one really, for probably because of the rape sequence and just because of its relentless, depressing nature, just doesn't really get that much play here in the States. I've had to kind of go and seek it out. You brought it to me, and then it's available on Amazon streaming if you pay a few bucks, which is what I did. But it's just not as kind of like beloved. If the Oliver Reed as a Wolfman is not something in like the American psyche. No. Unlike if you say Christopher Lee and people start rattling off, oh, Dracula, Frankenstein, Count Dooku, all the different things he's been in. He's just he managed to get that. Oliver Reed, people think, yeah, he's kind of a classy British actor who is a bit of a handful. That's how I think of him.
Yeah, more like a 70s action star, really. But well, yeah, and of course, The Wolfman was also like, along with The Mummy and Creature from the Black Lagoon, a character that was totally made up, didn't come from literature. Um, and like I think we said, he managed to get 4 sequels out of after the first movie, um, all played by Lon Chaney Jr. And they're all kind of fun, you know. Towards the end, they get really silly. Where I think they're trying to transplant his brain to stop him turning into a werewolf.
Oh, jeez.
Um, but they're worth a good look. Um, but yeah, it's funny. Like after you know we did this, I looked up Curse the Werewolf, and I found, I guess, the old double bills that used to be shown on the BBC in 1980 and 1981 and 82. And I was like, man, that must have been, I must have watched that as a child because I kind of vaguely remember that. Um, but yeah, same in England. They don't really show these anymore. You know, they always showed these on TV late in the night in the 70s and 80s and even 90s. And I think now they've kind of fallen out of favor a bit. Um, Now it's more reality shows and sport and stuff. So it's kind of like, you know, it's good catching up with it, seeing it, you know. And like I say, it didn't really work out for Hammer, so I think they kind of steered away from this. I think they lost money on this, and they really hated losing money. um, but yeah, it was good fun. I kind of didn't. I ran out of time. I kind of wanted to try to do the 2010 Wolfman as well, which was a pretty good adaptation of the Lon Chaney one. I think until the end, where
Yeah.
it went Van Helsing. Don't
Yeah.
don't go full Van Helsing. To quote Tropic of Thunder. You don't want to go full Van Helsing at the end. But up until then, it was quite good.
Yeah, it was really weird. I was not enjoying it, and I loved the basically ripped off from an American Werewolf in London, you know, Piccadilly
Yeah,
Circus sequence or wherever he was. I don't even remember anymore.
yeah.
And then you got to the
Gypsy.
end, and I was like, oh man, like they didn't need to do this. There were a million things they could have done. This feels like studio notes.
Yeah, they both
Uh,
kind of hulked out and start punching each other. But you got some gypsies in there. You got some gypsies in there earlier.
right.
I might have to dig that out close to Halloween just to take a look at it.
Yeah,
Um,
it's funny when I've caught it on cable. I think that there's definitely some gems within that movie, even if I don't think the movie itself is a gem. So
well, I think you and I have talked before about the best scene is probably where he's in the scientific institute lecture, and the guy's going, "Well, this man is, you know, has psychological problems. He believes he's a werewolf," and then of course he starts changing, and it's kind of great.
yeah, yeah, and that's kind of one of the things about these movies is the irony. You know, you've paid to see a movie called The Wolfman, right? And you know, as an audience member, when you've seen the poster, your butt's in the chair, you're going to see him turn into a Wolfman, and those people are all fools, you know, who don't believe he's going to turn into a wolf. It's like, well, of course he's not, and it's one of the interesting things in particular about, you know, a lot of different genres, really, but when we kind of like thumb our nose at the doctors and experts, and it kind of makes them always look like these dunderheads, and it's like, no, there's no reason they should think this guy's really a werewolf.
Yeah. Oh no, totally. Well, I can't think of anything else to say. Can you?
No, I mean, I think that, you know, both of these movies are fairly slight in their way, but they're both a lot of fun, and I would definitely, I think Wolfman's a good intro for like a kid to like
Yeah,
monster movies.
definitely.
It's not slow. It you know, clips along. It's got a character, you know, a main character who they can sympathize with. Um, and then, you know, it shows them kind of cool old school Jack Pierce makeup. So yeah, I would recommend it. Is, you know, probably 6 or 7 and up. I wouldn't start with the really little ones on this one, but your mileage will vary.
Yeah. No, it's definitely, yeah. I mean, I definitely think kids enjoy this. I remember they had a season of the Universal ones on TV, I guess when I was about 10 years old, and I kind of ate them up. I thought they were great. Um, even right up to the Abbott and Costellos, which are much more varying quality. But yeah, I think they still work really well, and it kind of made me want to delve into them a bit more.
Yeah, it did make me want to watch the sequels, and definitely watch. In my set, I have like the She-Wolf of London or something, which
Yeah,
I've never watched. I know I've had that. I probably own 2 copies of it on disc from various collections I bought over the years, and still never watched it. But we got some time before Halloween, so I'm going to squeeze it in.
yeah, cool.
All right. Well, happy Halloween, everybody, and Simon, thank you again.
No, it's been a pleasure. Happy Halloween, guys.
That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed this podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. You can drop comments on this podcast and let us know what you think. We do have a Signal Watch Patreon, and if you're so moved, we'd most certainly appreciate your support. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies. You've got to be kind.